Very importantly, my administration is also standing up for the free speech rights of all Americans. You look at Google, Facebook, Twitter, and other social media giants, and I've made it clear that we as a country cannot tolerate political censorship, blacklisting, and rigged search results.
We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds.
Thank you for joining us. You are listening to A Radio, and this is The Morning Moment. We're on weekdays, 11:45 Eastern. Follow us on Spreaker.com and click on the like button. This piece is entitled UK and Australia Move to Regulate Online Hate Speech, but Canada lags behind. Not sure about that. The piece is dated April 10. And it comes from the conversation.com. The link will be on my site. In response to the March attacks on 2 mosques in New Zealand, Ralph Goodale, Canada's public safety minister, recently released a statement following a G7 meeting in Paris. Goodale urged social media platforms to redouble their efforts to combat social harms relating to violent extremist content, while the Australian government rapidly introduced deeply flawed legislation to address the online distribution of violent content. The Canadian government issued only a weak plea for the industry to redouble its efforts. Alongside this plea, Goodale's statement also warned that social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter and YouTube should expect public regulation if they fail to protect the public interest. After the attacks in Christchurch, the violent march of white supremacists in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017, and the synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh in 2018, the Canadian government still apparently believes social media platforms can be trusted to protect the public interest. We'll leave a long, pregnant pause there. Piece continues. As my co-author, Blaine Haggart, and I have noted elsewhere, pressuring platforms to respond rapidly but without accountability to social problems, while also allowing platforms to interpret the rules themselves, is, quote, the worst of both worlds, unquote, approach to social media regulation. Outsourcing regulation. The governments are continuing to outsource regulation to commercial platforms is sadly nothing new, as I detail in my book, Choke Points, Global Private Regulation on the Internet. Government reliance on platforms to act as regulators is not confined to social media. Here, quote, choke points, unquote, refers to the regulatory capacity of large platforms can act as gatekeepers, controlling online flows of information and monitoring users' behaviour. Think about that, ladies and gentlemen. Monitoring your user behaviour. Do you really want that? I certainly don't. For instance, the dominant online payment providers, particularly Visa, MasterCard and PayPal, act as a financial checkpoint, a financial choke point, determining with little oversight or transparency who gets access to financial services. Given the concentration in the online payment industry, once an organisation loses access to a major payment provider, it can be difficult to secure a viable commercial alternative. After the Pittsburgh shooting, for example, PayPal removed its services from the what they call right-wing social media platform Gab, on which the man charged in the shooting had posted anti-Semitic messages just prior to the attack. Gab has become the alt-right platform of choice for white supremacists that allows hateful extremist speech that is typically banned from mainstream social media platforms. That is not true. Gab allows people to say what they want without fear of censorship. It's not left-wing, it's not right-wing. It's something called free speech. And this aggravates me to the nth degree. If you don't like what something is being said, reply to it or ignore it. Why does it have to be shut down? Because that creates animosity and anger, and far worse. Better to get it out in the open and you can see what people are thinking, and maybe you can respond to it rather than trying to crush it. Because if you crush it, there will be an air of resentment out there. Surely we don't want that. The article continues, we may applaud PayPal and other platforms for terminating their services to hate groups and support companies' efforts to throttle hate groups, fundraising and recruitment efforts. However, it's deeply problematic to rely on commercial entities to arbitrate behavior and content considered acceptable, or to address problems as serious as violent white supremacy. I'm going to interject again here, because this is the mainstream media talking. It's not ordinary people. Violent white supremacy is a minority of a minority of a minority of a minority. It's just like gay pride is put in the mainstream media as the norm when it's a minority, a minority, a minority of a minority. But they never tell you that, do they? Regulation by platforms. In a recent academic article, I urge that the public calls for PayPal to remove its services from hate group reveals serious problems about ceding broad regulatory authority to commercial platforms. First, payment providers' efforts against violent hate groups are troublingly reactive in response to public pressure and negative media coverage. Following the violence in Charlottesville, PayPal explained that it employs proactive monitoring, screening and scrutiny to identify hate groups and take action. But the social media network Gab openly promoted violently racist, anti-Semitic and discriminatory speech since its creation in 2016. It was only after the shooting in Pittsburgh that PayPal terminated its services to Gab. This again is the problem. If you were to analyse the amount of what they call hate speech on that social media platform, it is minute, the article continues. Second, platforms may act in response to negative media coverage to protect their corporate reputations, but also fear angering users who interpret such actions as censorship. There you go. That's the point. For instance, some conservatives argue that social media platforms stifle right-wing speech, while those on the left criticize the platforms for refusing to remove neo-Nazi propaganda. And I'm going to interject here as well. These social media groups, as we know, block us, but allow people like Antifa to operate with impunity, and others like that, and certain ethnic hate groups that are out there. They operate with impunity. They never get attacked. Third, and arguably most importantly, designating platforms as regulators generally neglects the whole role of government in online regulation. The process of how we decide to tackle regulation issues matters. Rules governing platforms can and should vary by country, reflecting each country's distinctive legal and political frameworks, domestic priorities and values. American-based platforms typically express strong ideological support for free speech that reflects the US constitutional values. Other countries like Canada may decide on a different balance between free expression and regulated speech. That's where I take issue, because they do not have the right under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada to infringe on any Canadian's right to speak what they want, when they want, how they want. And they know it, and they damn well know it. Any politician in this country of Canada that doesn't support the Charter in all its aspects, is a traitor to this country, in my opinion. They've got no right standing as a politician running for office when they don't support the Charter. I get very angry about that. Beginning with public discussion, regulating the internet is complex. It doesn't need to be regulated, that's the first thing. And we must avoid knee-jerk responses to horrific events like Christchurch. We'll tell that to the people in New Zealand. A good first step is a serious public discussion on possible ways to address violent hate speech. I wonder if these people have seen those banners in the streets of London saying we're going to make this a Muslim country. And they're always being put up on Facebook and Twitter. But nothing's ever done about that in the UK. Ever. Isn't it strange? Don't you find that strange? I certainly do. The British government has invited public comments on its newly released white paper outlining possible government-led responses to online harm. Let's just step in there for a minute. There are, as I've said many times, and people need to be aware of this because this is coming to every country in the Western world. In Britain, they have thought police. Thought police. I'm serious. There are groups of police in every jurisdiction in Britain, in every county that has a police force. And they're sitting there, banks of computers, one assumes, monitoring the likes of you and me and deciding whether what you post on Twitter, Facebook, or whatever social media platform you use is appropriate or inappropriate. And if it's inappropriate, God help you, because they'll be knocking on your door faster than a burglar can get in your house and steal your flat screen TV. I kid you not. But don't bother calling the police if somebody steals your flat screen TV, because that's not important. But you using the wrong word or adjective is far more serious. This is the state that we have come to in the nanny state, the politically correct nanny state. It's basically 1984. It really is George Orwell's 1984 coming to pass. They're controlling what you can eat, they're controlling what you can drive, and they're controlling what you can say. Have a guess what's next? The article continues. All options should be on the table. This means critically examining whether big platforms should be broken up to address anti-competitive behaviour, as US Senator Elizabeth Warren has proposed in regard to Facebook and others. Well, let me tell you, anything Elizabeth Warren proposes, I would immediately take the opposite view, even in this, because she's a communist. We also need to consider sharply restricting platforms' latitude in collecting and data mining their users' personal data, as well as limiting advertising-based business models. I'm just going to interject another little piece there. All the arguments that Google have come up with since the last presidential election are mute, because basically no one's admitting this, but it did happen. Google and others handed over data directly to the Obama administration. Did anybody comment on that? So they could use it for their general election. No one ever complained about that, did they? Yet they've all gone to town on Donald Trump because he won. Just because he won. Do you really think if Hillary Clinton had won that there would have been an investigation into her activities? No. Do you really think there would have been an investigation into Cambridge Analytica? No. It would have just been brushed under the carpet, wouldn't matter, because the right person would have won, as far as they're concerned. The piece continues. Platforms' reliance on advertising means that toxic content or harmful conspiracy theories can be highly profitable, thereby giving platforms little economic incentive to regulate harmful content. Further, and this is what I've just been saying, as Cambridge Analytics scandal shows, platform caches of users' personal data are being misused and also entrenching large platforms' market power. Publicly set rules should replace the current shadowy practice of behind-the-scenes government pressure and platforms' unaccountable rulemaking. An independent regulator funded by the government, not industry, should monitor platforms' compliance and impose penalties as necessary. Canada must begin a debate that the UK and Australia are having on regulating harmful online content when it comes to redoubling their efforts to deal with these issues. Our government should take the lead, not Facebook. Well, that's where I disagree, okay? I think there should be an independent ombudsman who monitors things in general. And I think a lot of people feel this in every country, that ombudsman should have the power to receive complaints from the general public, not just from certain ethnic groups. I can't say what I want to say because I'm in Canada, and despite what these people say, I don't have the right to say it. I should have. If I was across the border, I could say what I want to say, but I can't. But certain ethnic groups put pressure on people in this country not to put things on or take things off. And we know that's going on. We know that's going on. And in the public sector, protests by one group are allowed and protests by another group are not allowed. And all we're going to do is transfer from the real world to the virtual world how we operate, rather than have what we're supposed to have in this country and most countries, free speech. Free speech. It's not complicated. It's not complicated. Every time what they call right-wing people go out and protest on the streets, they're arrested or worse, attacked. Why is that? Because they believe in their views and you believe in your views. What's wrong with that? At the end of the day, if we're a democratic country, we're controlled by the voters in an election, not by somebody behind a glass screen. Isn't it time that we took control of what we could say, not them? Who are they? Are we going to allow this to continue to go down the George Orwell route, or are we going to stop it? Are we going to nip it in the bud? No one has the right to tell you what you can and cannot say. No one. And if you think they do, then perhaps you're living in the wrong country. And I really mean that sincerely. If people in Quebec don't like what people say in Ontario, tough. Maybe they're right and you're wrong. Or maybe you're wrong and they're right. Who knows? That's not the point. You should have the right to say something about a different area and a different person. Too bad. And if the majority wins, they win. If they don't, they don't. But nobody should be putting their fingers on the scale. Google at the moment are putting their fingers on the scale. They're trying to force Conservatives out of office by denying their right to be heard. And they're not the only social media platform. Look at your Facebook page, look at your Twitter page, and see how complicated it is now. I've said this the other day. This is a non-stop attack up till October this year in Canada and November 2020 in the United States. And it's certainly a non-stop attack, period, in the UK. We cannot drop our guard and we cannot compromise. There's no compromise on free speech. There's no compromise on free speech. I forgot to say that all the links obviously will be on my site. I'm sorry to ramble on a bit, but I think this is an important subject. I really do. Censorship is the thin end of the wedge. If you don't have free speech, you don't have freedom. And if you don't have freedom, you don't have democracy. You can find more at aradio.wordpress.com, where you can find links to us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Gab, and email. We are also on Spotify. Just go to the podcast section and type Canadian Politics with a twist, and you'll find us. We are continuing to reach out to you, so please pass on the links. Please click on the follow button on Spreaker.com. You can listen to all our morning moments at Spreaker.com under A Radio. That's EHRADIO, A Radio. And please click on the like button. And you can now hear a weekend review of our podcasts on WHBJ DB, News Talk Radio. Join us and many others. And you can find all our podcasts and morning moments at aradio.wordpress.com. Click on the Morning Moments tab.